Hello and welcome to LSAT Logic Applied. I'm your host, Andrew Leahy, an assistant teaching professor of law at Drexel Klein School of Law. This is a short format podcast where I take the tools from LSAT logical reasoning, assumptions, flaws, causation, strength and weaken, and apply them to real-world claims in the news, science, and public discourse. For those that don't know, the LSAT is the law school admission test, a standardized exam designed to assess logical reasoning, analytical thinking, and reading comprehension for law school applicants. It's a high-stakes test with a unique focus on how arguments work and how they fall apart. The LSAT is owned and administered by the Law School Admission Council, or LSAC. I don't claim any affiliation or ownership. I'm just here to teach the logic. You don't need to be studying for the LSAT to follow along. The point is to learn how to spot weak or incomplete reasoning in everyday life. The same kind of reasoning the LSAT trains you to attack under time pressure. Today's episode looks at an argument the federal government recently made in court about why it might take years to refund certain tariffs. We're not evaluating trade policy here. We're evaluating how the argument itself is constructed. Here is the basic background. A case in the U.S. Court of International Trade involves tariffs that were imposed under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or EPA. The court issued an order requiring U.S. Customs and Border Protection, that's CBP, to remove those tariffs from import entries and refund the duties that had already been collected. Now, that sounds simple enough, but CBP filed a declaration explaining why carrying out that order is extremely complicated. According to the agency, more than 53 million import entries include these tariffs. Those entries involve roughly 1.7 billion individual entry lines that would have to be recalculated, and processing refunds manually could require more than 4 million labor hours. So CBP argued that the refund process could take a very long time. And to support that point, the agency points to a historical example. In the late 1990s, after the Supreme Court ruled that the harbor maintenance fee was unconstitutional as applied to exports, the government had to refund large numbers of fees. According to CBP, that process took several years to complete, which leads to the key implied conclusion. If that refund program took years, then this refund could take years as well. So let's step back and apply some LSAT logic, because the key question is not whether the numbers are large. The question is whether the reasoning from that example to the conclusion actually holds. The argument structure is relatively simple, and it looks roughly like this. A previous government refund program, the harbor maintenance fee refunds, took several years to process. The current situation also involves a massive number of refunds. Therefore, the current refund process will likely take several years as well. At first glance, that sounds reasonable, but on the LSAT, this kind of reasoning raises an immediate red flag because it relies on what's called an analogy argument. And analogies are only as strong as the similarities between the two situations being compared. So let's use our LSAT lens for this claim and look at what's called a weak analogy. So this argument assumes that the harbor maintenance fee refunds and the current tariff refunds are meaningfully comparable, but that assumption might not hold. The harbor maintenance fee litigation occurred in the late 1990s. Government data systems were very different at that time, processing infrastructure was more limited, and many refund processes were not automated. Today, CBP uses a complex digital system called the Automated Commercial Environment, or ACE, to track imports and duties. That system may introduce new complications, but it also means the technological environment is very different from the one that existed decades ago. So the reasoning depends on an assumption that may not actually be justified. The two situations, separated by decades of technological and procedural change, are still sufficiently similar to support the same conclusion. On the LSAT, that's known as a weak analogy flaw. The argument assumes that because two situations share one similarity, in this case a large number of refunds, they will behave similarly as well. But unless the relevant underlying factors are the same, that conclusion may not follow. Another issue is scale and structure. The harbor maintenance fee refunds involved exporters and a particular type of fee structure. The current dispute involves tariffs tied to import entries, duty classifications, and complex reporting rules. CBP itself explains that many import entries combine different duties into a single reporting line, which can make isolating the specific tariff difficult. That structural complexity may be new, or it may be different from the earlier refund situation. But unless the two systems are shown to be comparable, the analogy remains incomplete. The LSAT tests this kind of reasoning all the time. You'll see arguments that look roughly like this. A previous situation with property X had outcome Y. The current situation also has property X. Therefore, the current situation will have outcome Y. The correct response on the LSAT is almost always the same question. Are the two situations actually comparable in the ways that matter? If not, the analogy may collapse. So if we wanted to strengthen CBP's argument, what evidence would help? Well, the LSAT gives us a pretty clear checklist. We would want to know whether the earlier harbor maintenance fee refunds involved a similar number of transactions, whether the administrative systems involved were comparable, whether the processing constraints were similar, and whether modern digital systems actually reduce or increase the difficulty of issuing refunds. Evidence showing that the two refund programs share the same operational challenges would make the analogy much stronger. Without that evidence, the analogy remains suggestive at best, but not necessarily persuasive. This episode isn't really about tariffs, it's about how analogies are used in arguments. When someone points to a past example and says, this situation will unfold the same way, the LSAT mindset asks a few immediate questions. Are the two situations actually comparable? Do they share the same underlying mechanisms? Or are we relying on surface similarities while ignoring deeper differences? Analogies can be powerful tools for reasoning, but when they're weak, they can quietly smuggle in conclusions that the evidence doesn't actually support. And learning to spot that kind of reasoning flaw is exactly what the LSAT is designed to test. And with that, I thank you for listening to LSAT Logic Applied. If you enjoyed this breakdown, subscribe for more short episodes where we apply clean logic to messy, real-world claims. See you next time.